it's time for another 31 on the 31st. This time the theme is vampires and werewolves. We've kind of veered away from our usual stint of doing, just dead set on franchises. We've taken a few singles, and we've even let you guys vote on some of the films that made the cut. Obviously, when I say we, I mean Cody Leach, Sean Chandler, and Willie Screedia, so do check out their videos as well. I would imagine most of you watching know the drill by now. I start with the worst and I rank them all the way to the best. So let's get into it.
Number 31.
Van Helsing for me is literally an unwatchable movie. I've tried multiple times. I still haven't finished it. I've seen half of this movie and I feel compelled to switch it off by the time I get to that halfway mark. That is the very definition of a half-star or one-star film. A film that is literally unwatchable.
Number 30.
Underworld comes pretty close to being as bad as Van Helsing, if I'm being perfectly honest. If not for the fact that sometimes it's so bad that it's funny, it's entertaining. The dialogue, again, really atrocious, but most of the film is vampires talking about being vampires. I would say 99% of the dialogue that comes out of characters' mouths is exposition. And for an action film, it's actually pretty short on the action.
Number 29.
An American Werewolf in Paris tries to recapture the magic of American Werewolf in London and fails pretty dismally, I would say. For me, the sound on this, the dubbing, is pretty terrible. It all felt like it was done in the studio. It seemed like they got the footage back to the studio and realised none of the sound had come out, so they redid the whole track in the studio. That's what it sounds like. I'm not saying they did do that, but for me, the sound just didn't seem to mesh a lot of the time with the actual environments that were going. I'm not saying it was out of sync or anything like that, but it didn't feel like it was in the atmosphere or the environment that we were seeing on screen. It is fairly entertaining in a kind of guilty pleasure kind of way. It's a bit more brutal and violent than I was expecting it to be, but then you've got that early noughties CGI thing going on, which again just tends to ruin a lot of the action sequences and things like that.
Number 28.
Number 28 is Twilight. I'm sure for many it's quite a surprise that this film even gets this high. I'm sure for most it's probably number 31, but I'd say it's reasonably well directed by Catherine Hardwicke. It's just a bit like dour and emo and talky. Again, suffers a lot of the problems that Underworld kind of suffers from, in the sense that it meanders through dialogue that is just always exposition, which I think seems to be a predominant issue with vampire movies in general.
Number 27.
Number 27 is Abraham Lincoln, a Vampire Hunter, a film by Timur Bekmambetov, who was coming off the back of some pretty decent vampire movies, actually, with the Night Watch and Day Watch movies, which, quite frankly, should have been on this list. Yeah. I can't escape the feeling all the way through this film that I'm watching a budget Liam Neeson in the lead role. Can't even remember the name of the lead actor in this, but I just always thinking budget Liam Neeson. Special effects, again, they go over the top. There's a whole sequence where they're fighting on horses that are stampeding, and I don't buy a single second of it. And up until that point, I am actually giving the film its due. I'm thinking, it is a kind of a guilty pleasure, it's all right. But then we hit that moment with a really awful special effects and the complete lack of believability, and I'm just out. And then from that point on, it does seem to just keep going downhill.
Number 26.
So Teen Wolf is the only film on this list that I haven't revisited. Whenever we do one of these 31 on 31s, I do try to revisit all the films that aren't particularly fresh in my mind. I remember kind of liking this as a kid. Bits of it, like we watched it with my brothers and we found bits of it funny and we watched it multiple times. But it's one of those movies that I imagine now not faring that well. Very much in the vein of Monster Squad, a film I loved as a kid, saw it as an adult. It didn't age well. I went and checked out some clips of this on YouTube, the trailer and that, and yeah, it looks a bit cheesy, a bit tacky, a bit like, it doesn't really look like it's going to work, to be honest. So I get anyone who's screaming at me, who's screaming at the screen right now and saying, you can't even remember it properly. I wholeheartedly agree. If there's any film on this list that could move up, it is definitely this one. But I didn't feel compelled enough by my past experiences with it to really seek it out. It didn't really bother me that I've not seen it again. Based on my memory of it, and based on the clips and stuff that I've seen to kind of re-jog my memory, this is where I would put it.
Number 25.
Blade Trinity sees the writer David S. Goyer of the first two movies taking the reins of director. Eek. Should have stuck to directing. Would have been better if they'd got a more high-profile director to come along and actually do something with the material. Yeah, this clearly shows, and I think further directorial efforts from Goyer clearly show that he is not a director. He is a writer. And I think if you get a good director to come along and take his script, they can do something with it. He's good at crafting a story, I'll say that much. But when he's in complete control, oof. When you got Dracula, the biggest, baddest vampire of them all, being played by a plank of wood, not the way to go.
Number 24.
John Carpenter's Vampires is one of those movies that I just don't seem to get on board with like most people. I don't find the main villain compelling. Again, when you got Dracula, the biggest of the baddest of the bad, and they kind of get someone to play him who I'm just not really engaged with. James Woods kind of chews up the scenery, sometimes a little bit too much. I get to the end of it and I'm just like, I feel like I've just seen a straight-to-DVD movie. Now, it did have a couple of straight-to-DVD sequels, which kind of tells you the vein in which it's going to go in. But no, to me, it always felt like a straight-to-DVD film. I get that some people really love it. I'm not one of them.
Number 23.
So the remake of Fright Night does enough, I would say, to coast along and bring quite a bit of entertainment value, most notably because of Colin Farrell, to be perfectly honest. I've never been that big on David Tennant the way a lot of people have. I know over here, a lot of people really loved his Doctor Who. I tend to find that when he's in TV or movies, he overacts. I feel like he's a theatre actor and he brings that larger than life kind of theatre thing to a medium that requires a bit more subtlety, I would say. His Peter Vincent for me is no Roddy McDowall. Absolutely think this is inferior to the original, but as far as remakes go, particularly modern remakes, we're in this era of like just remaking everything, and most of the time it tends to be pretty crap. This is actually not a bad effort. It's pretty entertaining. I would watch it again. It's the first film on this list that I would actually call good.
Number 22.
Now, while I really did like What We Do in the Shadows, I did feel like it was a bit overrated. Now, coming to it, I was expecting like Spinal Tap levels of humour. It doesn't quite for me, but there are quite a bit of funny moments in it. There's some pretty well observed kind of things in there for fans of the genre. If you're looking back to all the old vampire movies, there's stuff in here that unless you've seen all those old movies, you probably wouldn't get it. The people who made the film are clearly fans, or at the very least they've done their research. I enjoyed the characters. I did laugh multiple times, but it was. I've always said I'm not the comedy guy.
Number 21.
I rewatched The Howling for this 31 and 31, and I'm actually quite glad I did, because it would be a lot lower down. It would be right near the bottom, to be honest, if I'd gone off my previous experience of watching it. I didn't like this film all that much first time around. I was expecting a horror classic, and I felt like I just got something that was a bit weird, to be honest. Yeah, I watched it again for this, and actually I enjoyed it. It hit me differently the second time around. I was a bit more invested in the characters. I think because I knew where it was going, I could appreciate it on its own terms.
Number 20.
Fright Night 2 is another film I was expecting to be pretty low down on this list until rewatching, to be honest. But actually, this is a sequel that really holds its own with the original. It's not quite as good as the original, but I was surprised by how close it came. I watched this a fair bit way back when I was a kid. My brother, in particular, my eldest brother, he really loves both the Fright Night movies. And yeah, I always remember this one just being a lot more inferior and essentially just a retread of the first one. But I think there's enough in here to separate it. I would actually go as far as to say that this is director Tommy Lee Wallace's best film. There's not a particularly high bar. I wasn't that big on Halloween 3, and the TV iteration of It hasn't aged greatly well, although it is still pretty well drawn with regards to the character development. And yeah, he did do one of the said straight-to-DVD sequels to John Carpenter's Vampires. So yeah, not a blistering career by any stretch of the imagination, but yeah, of the work of his I've seen, this is easily the best film that he's done.
Number 19.
Brotherhood of the Wolf is another movie that I didn't have great memories of. Sean Chandler picked this one to be on the list, and I was a bit like, one, I'm not sure it's even a werewolf movie, Sean, but also I don't remember it being that good. But anyway, I watched it for the sake of this, just to refresh my memory, and it was way better than I remember it being. The action sequences are really good. A lot of the character stuff is really good. It's tense. There's a love story angle in it that just didn't need to be there. I felt like I didn't buy it. I didn't buy into it. Didn't believe it. But everything else was really good.
Number 80.
From Dusk Till Dawn for me is a film that now kind of runs mostly on nostalgia. When I saw it way back when, I loved it. And it was a film I watched quite repetitively for a period of time. It hasn't aged particularly well. And actually the things about the film that I never used to like are now the things that I actually really do like. And the things that I used to love are now the things that I look at and go, it's a bit childish. It don't quite work. Way back when, it looked great. It was icky. It was very schlocky. Now you look at it, a lot of those effects haven't dated well. A lot of the vampire stuff isn't quite as entertaining as I remember it being. But actually, a lot of the stuff at the beginning, in the first half of the film, when it's gangsters on the run, feels a bit more Tarantino-esque to me, and I'm actually more engaged with it.
Number 17.
Silver Bullet was a first-time watch for me for this 31 on 31. I had never seen it before, watched it for this, and really enjoyed it. I know it's based on a Stephen King novella or novel or whatever, and I think a lot of the adaptations, particularly around the 80s, can be pretty hit or miss. Again, this is one that Cody always kind of raved about, and I always thought it was going to be one of them that you had to be there. You had to be in the period when it was made and have seen it way back when, and then have that kind of nostalgia factor. So coming to this fresh, not having any of that, I gotta say, this film works. It works pretty well. Gary Busey in it is pretty entertaining as the uncle who kind of isn't always the most responsible. But yeah, you see his relationship with his nephew and how that develops across the course of the movie, and how they come together to kind of stop this werewolf threat. It feels very Stranger Things-esque, which is a bit of a stupid thing to say because obviously it became before Stranger Things. But, you know, if you're a fan of Stranger Things and you didn't grow up in the 80s and, you know, you love the vibe you get from Stranger Things, then it's this kind of movie, I think, that it's aping.
Number 60.
Stakeland is certainly one of the most bleak films on this list, if not the most bleak. It kind of feels pretty episodic, and that's because it was originally designed as a web series, but the creators of it decided, actually, let's get a lot of these ideas we had for the web series and just put the best ones together and make a film. And it works really well as a snapshot of a dystopian world in which, yeah, society has crumbled at the hands of vampires, and you've got these two hunters just on the road doing their business and getting into run-ins, getting into scrapes, meeting various characters. Some characters who are quite reprehensible and you want to see die. Other characters who you don't want to see go through certain things. And it's just, that's where I'd say the strength of the film lies, is in its characters, the way it draws the characters out. I think the actors, the writers, director Mickle do a really good job of getting to grips with these people that they put on screen and showing us who they are.
Number 15.
I wasn't expecting to like Renfield as much as I did. I found this film very entertaining. I thought Nicholas Hoult was very watchable. Nicolas Cage can be really hit or miss. I actually thought he was pretty well cast here. He kind of did give some of those Bela Lugosi vibes. The humour worked for me, the action worked. It's quite gory, quite bloody, and I enjoyed the characters.
Number 14.
Lost Boys for me is a film that as a kid, as a teenager, I absolutely loved, watched it so many times. It's still a very good film. It's not aged quite as well as I would have liked it to. I don't think Joel Schumacher is a great action director. I think if you give him the right thriller, he can really deliver in the thriller department. As I say, it's still a very good film. I still really like it. I will still watch it again. But I do think it is a film that definitely gets by with the help of a lot of nostalgia.
Number 13.
I've just recently reviewed Daybreakers on my channel, so do check out my review for that. I didn't like it when it first came out at the cinema. It took me it took me till now to go back and revisit it. And I'm glad, because I really loved it the second time around. It's a really good take on dystopian society that I feel is quite relevant to a lot of stuff that's going on today with divisions in society, only told through the lens of, you know, vampires and humans. The story and the characters are highly engaging, and the world building from the directors, Spearig Brothers, is very well played.
Number 12.
An American Werewolf in London is generally considered to be an absolute classic of the genre. It's also considered to be a horror comedy. Now, for me, I didn't really find it all that funny. There are moments of humour in it. I don't necessarily think that makes it a comedy. I think, first and foremost, it's a thriller/horror about a man kind of coming to terms with his fate. We see a man at the beginning getting bitten, and then across the course of the film, we get to the inevitable conclusion and the tragedy of that conclusion. I don't think it's quite as good as the hype would suggest, but I do think the effects work is still brilliant, still holds up really well, and it has a pretty engaging central character.
Number 11.
Fright Night is one of those movies from the 80s that makes you instantly think, yeah, that was the 80s, and yet still works. There's some music in it that's not my bag, to be honest. Very 80s music. That's for me is the biggest letdown of the film is the score. There is music in it that I'm kind of like, yeah, I remember liking that back then, but now I'm not really into the whole synth thing. I would also say that there are times when the central character of Charlie Brewster comes across as way too fierce in his sexual advances towards his girlfriend, like in a way that just wouldn't wash today. That didn't sit quite well with me. So those two things aside, everything else is really great. There's some real humorous moments in it. There's some absolutely fantastic special effects, physical special effects, and a really great villain at the centre of it all.
Number 10.
So before Black Panther came along, way before Black Panther came along, and the world cried, yes, finally a black superhero, we got Blade, who did it way before and much better in my personal opinion. No attention brought to the fact that this guy is black. He's just a man who's a superhero doing what he's doing, and we don't have to be hit over the head every 5 minutes with some social commentary about race. And for me, that works a heck of a lot better. I don't feel like I'm being preached to. It's just a really great kick-ass action vampire horror film that kind of makes me feel bad that Stephen Norrington, the director, gave up directing. It's a shame, because actually this is a pretty damn good film that not only did it kind of give us the first black superhero, but it also really kick-started the whole modern day comic book phase off, reignited it, so to speak. Comic book movies were pretty dead in the water by this point, and then Blade came along, went R-rated, and suddenly we were like, oh, okay. It deserves a lot more credit, does Blade, for its contributions to cinema.
Number 9.
First is a film from Korean director Park Chan-wook, the man who gave us the Vengeance trilogy. This particular film was chosen by CP, and I watched this and I think, yes, that's exactly the kind of film I would expect CP to choose. Before he spits his dummy out and starts moaning at me, it's a good film. I liked it, CP. Good choice. It is a bit weird though, let's face it. Probably one of the weirdest films on this list. It also gets a little bit too much in the sex department. There's one stretch of the film where the two main characters just seem to be having sex a lot, and it's just like, okay, is this it now? Is this all the film's going to be from this point? But if you can get past that, there's a lot of other stuff in the film, a lot of social commentary, a lot of commentary about faith and damnation, and I think the film covers it pretty well and is probably deserving of a second watch. I feel like it's one of those movies that will probably reward you on multiple viewings as you start to dissect everything that's going on. But no, I enjoyed the journey of the central character, this man of faith, this man of God who is afflicted with this vampire kind of curse, so to speak. He becomes a vampire, and it's a journey about what is going to happen to this guy as he loses his soul, so to speak. Will he lose his soul? Has he already lost his soul? It's a very interesting film. At times quite funny as well. Very dark humour. It's not a laugh riot or anything, but there's definitely some dark humour in there. Highly entertaining if you're in the right mood.
Number 8.
Bram Stoker's Dracula is a film from Francis Ford Coppola, the guy who gave us the Godfather trilogy, trying his hand here at horror and doing a pretty damn good job of it. It does feel like a horror movie of old, in which you have these really extravagant sets that have been built and really kind of bright, vibrant colours, particularly reds. You think of like Hammer movies and things like that. I love the atmosphere of this film. I love a lot of the practical effects in this film. One particular moment when Gary Oldman's Dracula turns into this huge bat creature. It's just some really incredible work in the effects department. Performances mostly across the board are pretty great, particularly Oldman, and Anthony Hopkins. I've got a lot of love for this film. It's a film that I kind of forget how much I like it until I rewatch it. And when I rewatch it, I'm like, that really is one of the best vampire movies out there. Great performances, great effects, really great production design, and a really great title track at the end by Annie Lennox.
Number 7.
Dog Soldiers, despite what Cody Leach or CP might say with their American attitude towards things, is an absolute classic werewolf movie. It's a blast. It's an absolute blast. There's some great action. There's some real humour in it that comes out of the almost like situational comedy kind of thing. You know, finding these soldiers trapped in a house with werewolves trying to get in. But I do think it is absolutely 100% quintessentially British, and I do kind of understand where Cody and CP might fall down on this film. Like, I think the way the soldiers speak, the way the characters in this speak, it is very British. There's a lot of kind of British colloquialisms. Is that the right word? Colloquialisms. Can never say that word. That, yeah, if you're British, you get it. There's like certain things they say, certain language they use that as a Brit, it's quite funny. The way they talk to each other, these soldiers, there's multiple times where I'm just like, yeah, that's funny to me. But I can imagine an American watching this and it kind of going over the head in many ways. Not because they're stupid, but just because, as I say, it's very culturally specific. I like the design of the werewolves. I love the setting. I love the interplay, the banter between the soldiers, and there's some pretty badass moments in it. And yeah, again, like seeing Sean Pertwee's character trying to keep his entrails inside while a dog's kind of having it. It just cracks me up. It's it's a highly entertaining film. What can I say? It's still Neil Marshall's best, I would say.
Number 6.
Blade 2 is a really fantastic sequel. It does what a great sequel should do. It builds on the first film, but it doesn't reject what the first film brought. It takes that and it builds upon it. It opens up the world. It kind of fleshes it out a lot more, so we get to see more into the vampire kind of mythology, into how their world works. The direction from Guillermo del Toro is absolutely superb. Some of the visuals he puts on screen are pretty crazy. There are some times when the effects work doesn't quite live up to his vision, particularly a scene when all these CGI people are swinging about all over the place. It didn't kind of work back then, and it still doesn't now. But everything else, you know, the design of the vampires with the mouth that opens up, the chin kind of thing, it's really disgusting, but like really creative and yeah, icky. It's got a real great central villain as well, Luke Goss of Bros fame. He plays this villain, this vampire who is kind of a threat to your more traditional vampires, and then you've got Blade having to team up with those traditional vampires in order to hunt him down.
Number 5.
Who'd have thought you could make a really great horror film about a woman having her period? This is essentially what Ginger Snaps is. It's about women getting to that time. You got these two sisters who are real outcasts. One of them gets bitten by a werewolf and becomes a werewolf, and the whole film plays as a commentary on a woman getting her period, getting a time of the month, and becoming a monster and going through all kinds of changes. And yeah, it's really well told. It's humorous. It's got some really dark, twisted stuff in it. You know, the two central characters, these two sisters, are not the most warm and lovable people, it's got to be said. As far as protagonists go, people that you're following in the movie, they're probably not the kind of people I would want to hang out with. the story itself and the way that they fit into the world is still highly engaging. Mimi Rogers as the sister's mother as well is highly entertaining as a reflection of clueless parents who yeah, who are just not in touch with the young people at all. But she does a really great job of that, of bringing humour to it, but also at various points in the film turning it just enough so that you recognise that this is a human being, that there is humanity in this woman who does care for and love her daughters in her own weird ass unique way.
Number 4.
30 Days of Night is a really fierce, brutal, bloody vampire movie that gives us vampires as I like them. If you're going to make a vampire movie, don't give me vampires that spend most of the running time talking about what it's like to exist as a vampire. I don't care, okay? Vampires should be brutal creatures of the night whose main goal is to just get blood, basically, and they kill people as a result of that. They are a threat. They are a real nasty threat that needs to be put down with as much efficiency as possible. And that's what this film does. It sticks a bunch of people in an isolated location and throws a load of vampires at them, and it's all at war. They are fighting for survival, and we don't get any big long-winded speeches by the vampires about their kind and all that. No, it's just these things mean business. We've got to really do our damnedest to survive. I love it. It's a great film, some really great visuals. Director David Slade does a fantastic job. He would go on to make the best of the Twilight movies. Give him a proper vampire film to do. He gives us 30 Days of Night. It's absolutely fantastic. It's not for the faint of heart. There's some real brutal stuff in it. But yeah, it's a great film.
Number 3.
Going into this, I knew I was going to like Interview with a Vampire. It's a film I've watched many times. Back in the late 90s, early noughties, I'd watched it quite a bit. Brilliant cast, just really great story, great period detail, fantastic direction from Neil Jordan. I knew it was going to make my top 10, but I'd pretty much kind of assumed it wasn't going to crack my top 5. But here we go, here we are.
Number 2.
I first watched Near Dark sometime in the late 90s. I'd never heard of it before, and I was flicking channels, and this was just starting. I think it was on Channel 4 or whatever. I watched it, and I was absolutely hooked. Phenomenal vampire film from director Catherine Bigelow. Severin, played by Bill Paxton, one of the best vampire villains ever put to screen, I think. He's having a blast in this. Bill Paxton, he's on full throttle Bill Paxton mode, just taking delight in some of the sickest pleasures that a vampire might take delight in. Lance Henriksen as well, also great in this, and just I love how Bigelow shows us the dynamic between this vampire family. You know, it's kind of been cobbled together over the years, and then now this family unit, making their way across country, killing people when and where they can, and just essentially just trying to survive. It's a great action film, it's a great horror film, one of the best, but not quite the best.
Number 1.
Because actually, my number 1 is Let the Right One In, and this is not only my favourite vampire movie of all time, it may very well just be my favourite horror movie of all time. It's a very close call, I think, between this and possibly The Shining. I love this movie. I absolutely love it. I think it's a really great dissection of the nature of evil, of what it means to be truly evil. And I've got on record as saying many times that I think a lot of people misread this film. I think it's not about the boy letting the vampire in. You know, there is that whole thing where you've got to invite them in order to let them in. But I think that's been inverted, subverted. And I think actually this is a film about the vampire letting the kid in and kind of grooming him to become her next carer. And I think she is true evil in this film. I think when you dress evil up in the skin of a young female child, who it's actually revealed at one point isn't even female, which kind of feeds into that whole subterfuge and the twisted nature of who Ellie is, and the lie that she is. It's really about a wolf in sheep's clothing. You know, you've got this wolf, this vampire, this creature of the night who kills to survive, and her old carer is running out of time. He's not quite on his game the way he used to be. She recognises that she needs to bring someone new into the fold, and so she starts to groom this young boy, and he grows attachment to her, thinks perhaps he's falling in love with her, and maybe she might be doing the same with him, but it's all a ruse. It's really all a ruse. She's got no love for this child. It's literally about bringing him into the fold, getting a carer, and yeah, she's evil. And I just think the way the film conveys that in a really subtle way, without hitting you over the head with it, I think it's brilliantly directed, it's brilliantly acted. It's got tremendous cinematographer from one of my favourites, Hoyte van Hoytema. It's an absolute masterpiece of a film. But yeah, there you go. That is my 31 on 31 ranking. But how would you rank these 31 movies if you've seen them all? If not, just tell me the ones you have seen. And if you've not seen the other guys' videos, do go and check them out. Thank you for watching this video, and until next time, cracking.